This is week 6, audio 4, and we're starting on slide 22. So we'll talk about now how what happened as the high tide continued and began to wind down. Going on to slide 23. So as Mao ordered the PLA to restore order, it was not easy, and it did not all happen at once. There was some very severe fighting that occurred in a number of places. At one point, there were actually in Chengdu, which is in Sichuan province to the southwest of Wuhan. In Chengdu, there was actually fighting on the streets where different Red Guard factions were using artillery, and they were using tanks. And they destroyed large numbers of residential neighborhoods in the course of their armed combat. So there was actual civil war going on. People don't often call it that because it was on a limited scale, and it didn't last very long, and it was localized. So it wasn't as if civil war broke out all over the country and all of a sudden there was a condition of general war. That didn't happen. But once the situation was brought under control and Mao decided it was time he didn't want these revolutionary committees to turn into an army dictatorship. That was his real bottom line. He wanted to make sure that the party controlled the gun, not that the gun controlled the party. He wanted to make sure that the party was stayed in charge of the military. And as it stood, with the party so weakened and the Red Guards purposely handicapped by Mao as the months went on, he did not want the Red Guards controlling local activities, local government. He wanted the party to come back and be the leading organization in these revolutionary committees. And so I think, this has never been proven, but I think this is why in March of 1968, Lin Biao arrested his new chief of staff, Yang Chengwu, who up until this point had played a very important role in putting the army out into localities and having them restore order. It seemed nonsensical. Why is this happening? And I suspect that the reason is that it was a political move to scare. You've probably heard of this: kill the chicken to scare the monkeys. Well, this you're killing the leader to scare all the chickens, sort of backwards. But it may be that he simply wanted to make sure that army leaders realized that they were not the new masters. And this made them more inclined to follow orders, to allow party leaders in the localities to take the lead in restoring order and refreshing government services. There was a reaction to this. It was not simple. People did not just march in lockstep to whatever Mao wanted. During the springtime of 1968, there was even more fighting in some of the cities, and this is when the Chengdu fighting really got going. But gradually it was brought under control, and even in the capital, there were Red Guards that still were fighting each other, and Mao summoned the leaders of the 4 major factions in Beijing at the time, and allegedly with tears in his eyes, told them that their time was up. They were going to go now. They were going to go up to the mountains and down to the countryside. There were also people, now they didn't want to go, but they went, and as you can see, there are 2 happy young people on their way, obviously, to a romantic rendezvous taking care of pigs in southern Henan or something like that. They refer to themselves as the lost generation, and with good reason. This was a generation of young people who are now in their 60s. They're the equivalent of the Vietnam generation. They're in their 60s and 70s now, and they were not able to finish their education. That is, people who, a few among them who would have had an education, were not able to finish it. Instead, they were shoveling shit in Louisiana. Not really. They were shoveling slop in Shanxi or something like that. And it was not easy. Their families were separated from each other rather purposely. I've never been able to figure out why families had to be separated from each other, but that's the way it all fell. It was a very sad, desperate situation for many years, for the remainder of Mao's life. Going on to slide 24. At the same time, there were lots of other problems going on. I really didn't take much time to mention the war that occurred between China and India, the brief border war in 1962. I'll try to mention that next week when we talk about what was going on in Tibet during this period. There were clashes between the Indians and the Chinese in 1962. There were also clashes with the Russians, starting then and continuing 4 years later in the northeast, along the Ussuri and Amur rivers, between Manchuria and the Russian Far East. And part of this was the same sort of ridiculousness, xenophobia, that prompted Chinese diplomats to emerge from the embassy in London and attack the British bobbies that were just standing around minding their own business in order to prove what revolutionary stalwarts they were. And I'm making light of it, but there was a practical reason for this. Why on earth would these Chinese diplomats do this? Because it was August of 1967, and people back home were doing all sorts of crazy stuff, including burning down the British embassy. So if you want to not be recalled to Beijing and then sent to shovel swill in Shanxi, then perhaps you should be as militant as possible when you're in London. That's my guess, anyway. The Soviets and the Chinese came very close to war, and supposedly, according to Nixon and Kissinger's memoirs, they warned the Soviets away from a first strike. So let's go to slide 25. And I promise, this time I'm not going to dive into detail here. I just want you to basically look at the numbers and the results. You can read this for yourself. But you can see that the Politburo Standing Committee, this is kind of mistaken. The top set here, it's really 6 people on the Politburo Standing Committee. The people who are below there were alternate members. But the full members are the 6 people on top there. Mao Zedong, Liu Shaoqi, Zhou Enlai, Zhu De, Chen Yun, and Deng Xiaoping. So they were the Politburo Standing Committee from 1956 until 1965 into 66. But in 66, all of them, except for 2 of those boys, were dropped. Mao and Zhou stayed on, as you can see at the very bottom there, the 9th Politburo Standing Committee from the 9th Congress. Mao and Zhou are still there. Kang Sheng, starting from the left, Mao Zedong. Lin Biao, his army chief and second in command, his heir apparent, the biggest promoter of Mao thought. He was on the Politburo in 1969 officially. Zhou Enlai is still there. He's the only one who can run the government, and that's why he was held on, and because he was the premier self-criticizer and kiss-upper of the upper reaches of the Communist Party, that's for sure. He's thought of as a saint, and indeed he tried to do some nice things, but he was also a very ruthless man. I won't go there. Kang Sheng is the next one, the second from the right. The old Secret Service chief who turned ideologue and a chief promoter of Mao thought. Really, I don't know why he was left out of the Gang of Four after Mao died. He died in 1973. And Chen Guoda, who was a radical, an associate of Jiang Qing on the Cultural Revolution group. I don't know why he didn't make the Gang of Four. He was purged before Mao died, though, because he was so militant and so insistent on following the leftist line. Going to slide 26. Then came the most bizarre thing that you can imagine. After the Ninth Congress was over with, Mao officially ousted Liu Shaoqi. He had already been under arrest for 3 years, of course, and he would live a few years longer and die of neglect in a prison. At this point, Lin Biao, who was sickly by nature, strove above all things to keep a low profile and to stay out of the way. Mao wanted him to take a more active role, and he also wanted that young man Wang Hongwen to take a more active role, and neither one of them were up to it, and this frustrated Mao to no end. He and Lin began to not get along very well at all. There was a very interesting situation when Prince Sihanouk of Cambodia visited Beijing, and Lin Biao and Mao and Princess Monique and Prince Sihanouk are sitting on the rostrum in Tiananmen Square overlooking a rally. This is in 1970. And Lin Biao and Mao barely speak to each other. They ignore each other like an old couple who have been married so long they can't stand each other. It was a very bizarre sort of scene. Lin Biao retreated, withdrew more and more as the months went on, and in 1971, his son, Lin Liguo, probably really did hatch a scheme to try to assassinate Mao, partly because he thought that Mao was about to purge his father. Lin Liguo, the son of Lin Biao, was a senior officer in the Air Force at this time. And when his plot was discovered, he went, according to the studies that have been done recently, he went home to Dad and Mom's place. He told Mom, Lin Biao's wife, that we've been discovered. We're all doomed. We better run for it. And so they slipped Lin Biao some drugs in his tea and drugged him out of his mind. Put him in a car, took him to an air base near Beijing, put him on a private jet, one of those little Learjet sort of things, and fled toward Russia. But they forgot to fill up the gas tank. And I'm not making this up. They only got as far as about 200 miles over the border with Mongolia, and the plane ran out of fuel and crashed in the middle of the night in Mongolia. And Lin Biao's, it's not like one of those Elvis disappears sort of things, with Lin Biao being spotted 5 years later on a beach in Hainan in the company of two beautiful women. He really did die in the plane crash along with Lin Liguo, his son, and with his wife, whose name was Ye Chun. Because the Russians and the Chinese worked together using dental records and figured out that indeed it's him. Mao was devastated by this and went into a terrible depression with Zhou Enlai running the country until the Nixon visit was arranged, and he snapped out of it for the Nixon visit. And we'll be talking about the Nixon visit next week. We'll also catch up with what was happening in Tibet in the 1960s, and go on to discuss the last 4 years, 1972 to 1976, the last 4 years of Mao's life, and the beginning of the post-Mao era that followed. Thank you very much.